the the first thing on my list, which opened the year off and set the tone, we didn't know how much, but it was Kobe. Remember, Kobe died in January, and this was pre-COVID. COVID was happening in other countries; it wasn't here yet, and this was pre-impeachment, roughly, and this was, or kind of right around the same time. And so this was before Biden won the nomination. It was kind of before all of that, but all of that got drawn out. But Kobe was the first thing I thought of was this year. Second thing was the election, Biden winning, um, the historic nature of Kamala. We didn't really get to see a Biden campaign how he would normally campaign. There wasn't any big rallies or anything. That's because the third thing on my list is COVID, right? That set the tone for the whole year. Everybody was affected by it, whether you knew somebody or your life was impacted because you couldn't see your grandkids or whatever it was. I thought COVID was there. George Floyd, like it seems like a forever ago, but in the summer, George Floyd and the unrest and what that led to, I think is going to have reverberations for a long time. And I didn't know this, so I Googled it, but the fifth thing on my list is the impeachment, because I guess that happened at the top of the year, but it's such a long year that it's just really, really hard to remember that. But the president got impeached this year. It's kind of crazy.
Well, I will tell you, I have essentially the same five, no particular order, but I'm going to add a sixth, and I'm going to give you, and we'll visit this near the end, but my sixth and is verses. Now that's weird.
A celebration.
But the reason why versus is on that list is because it's very symbolic of how we had to adapt, right? So it's versus is maybe that cultural point, but it's really just a very significant um, event in the larger adaptation, especially as relates to pop culture and many of the things that we come to enjoy. And but let's go back and start with your number one, Kobe, dude. I can't believe how that impacted me.
Yeah.
I was in tears the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't boo hoo. I just the tears just run down my face. And I was watching CNN started their year in review, and when Michael started talking and it got Michael upset, it was just remarkable how that impacted us all. What's next on your list?
Election.
The election.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I think the thing that's so crazy, and it's kind of like the heart of the show, what we call multitask, is the election is such a big story on a multitask level, right? Biden got more votes than anyone in history. Um, the historic nature of Kamala, the way that Biden came back in the primaries, the importance of the black vote, how Trump, I mean, I don't know, we haven't talked about this. I definitely thought that Trump's numbers were going down. Not only did I think he was going to lose, and I knew he was going to lose, but I thought he was going to lose with less votes than he got in 2016. I didn't think he'd get.
He also got the second most votes of everybody ever.
Right. So I think to your point, it's kind of why we started to show the multitask, because we could do an entire top 5 elements or top 5 surprises of the election. It's crazy.
The third thing was COVID, which is all connected to everything at some point for this year. Yeah.
Well, you know what's interesting? I remember my father and my sister were having a conversation either in fourth quarter of 2019 or first quarter, right before it blew up. There was a report, and my sister is one of those people who is she can be a worrier. And I remember her seeing a news report or hearing about the coronavirus. And I remember her being like completely freaked out. And it was like, we weren't even caring about it. And I remember like it was a nightly news report, and you started seeing it, like, no way, we're not going to get it. I just don't know.
For me, it was a little different. I work at a company that does a lot of, we have factories in China, and we have people that go to China regularly, like every month. And they were canceling trips because it was so bad in China. And then I thought, well, I mean, Trump wants to brag about the airports closing, but we didn't shut anything down, right? And then you started seeing Iran and Italy, and then I remember Illinois had 2 cases for like January, and all of a sudden I had a trip planned to Mexico in February. So I was like, I wonder. By the time I got back from Mexico, it was already over. The whole time, by the way, now we know this. The whole time it was here, we were just misdiagnosing it with the flu and stuff. So we were in the hot zone the entire time. We just didn't know it.
Well, and I think the thing is the story of the year. Obviously, I think it'll be the story of maybe the century.
Yeah.
You know, but what's really frustrating about it is how poorly we're handling it as a country.
Yeah.
How systematically we're not built for this, and even though we're not systematically built for this, we still would have the brain power, the in under normal circumstances, even under a George Bush, even under a Jeb Bush, even under a Marco Rubio, you think we would have the brain power and moral authority to actually do a better job? I mean, I think the story of the death toll is going to be, years from now, is going to be so amazing, literally, because it didn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
This isn't I mean, maybe there were mistakes being made during the whole Spanish flu episode, but the reality is that, especially when you look at what's going on in other countries, um, it the the virus itself is almost secondary to the just incompetence and malfeasance of our national leadership, and in many states the leadership at the gubernatorial level, not in Illinois, not in New York, not in California, but in Florida and Missouri,
Texas.
so many different places. I mean, it's just frustrating. So next on the list
Was George Floyd.
wow. And George Floyd was difficult for me for a number of reasons, and it's kind of like how we were just talking about how Trump wouldn't have lost if it wasn't for COVID.
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd's killing obviously was horrible and it was traumatic, but I'm also pissed at all the people who saw George Floyd's killing and decided now was the time to do something.
Absolutely.
Michael Brown was the time to do something.
Yeah.
Trayvon, Laquan McDonald was the time to do something. Eric Garner was the time to do something. Trayvon Martin was the time to do something. So I can't, I don't want to upset people, and I don't want to disrespect those who are stepping up and finally seeing that this is a problem. But I'm pissed as hell that it's finally here. This should not, this, seeing Laquan McDonald shot 16 times but on video by a Chicago police officer, that should have been enough.
Yeah.
And everything that happened before that should have been enough.
I'll double down on what you just said. All these companies, whether it's entertainment, sports, NHL, NASCAR, all these companies that made promises, that made proclamations about what they were going to do in the future. It's time now, right? Like now is the time. Like we're going to hold you to that. You posted a black square on Instagram that day. That's cool. But now is the time, and the world's changing, and you're going to get left behind, and we're going to make sure of it. So I think everybody who wanted to be activists in June and July because it was cool for Instagram, the receipts are going to be coming in 2021, and I hope that you stand by what you said and what you promised back then.
Right, and don't forget we had one from George Floyd to what was the guy that was shot in Kenosha? I forget the guy's name. But remember, the NBA the players almost didn't play.
Yeah.
But you also wonder if we're not dealing with COVID. Like, okay, what made it? Was it the knee on the neck for 9 minutes? What made George Floyd the pivot point, so to speak? Do you think it was COVID? Do you think the fact that we were all at home and the fact that that a lot of us would have been at bars or at a baseball game and everything else? What do you think made what do you think made George Floyd different from everything else that had happened?
I thought about this a lot, and George Floyd is really lumped in with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. Like we kind of have these moments where it happens in threes, right? It was Trayvon and Michael Brown and Freddie Gray, and then it was Laquan and Philando Castile and Eric Garner. And it kind of happens in these kind of groups. And that group was Ahmaud Arbery and then Breonna Taylor and then George Floyd. I think what happened with George Floyd was we've never had it so close and so vivid. You know, we have these camera phones and everything's so high quality, but Eric Garner's video was very, very blurry, very choppy, and there wasn't a video for Trayvon. Michael Brown, there was pictures of him lying in the street, but there wasn't a video. And George Floyd was this HD. She was 2-3 feet away from her, and God bless her, who had the bravery to sit there and record the whole time. And you could hear him. You could hear him struggle to breathe. You could hear him. And I think it was so vivid that it really impacted people in a different way than it usually does. Like just like we were saying about the Wisconsin, there was some video, but it was very from afar, and you couldn't really see, and it's hard to really see what's happening. But George Floyd was so in your face.
Let's move on to impeachment.
Yeah,
It's I think it's funny because it happened in January, and I guarantee you there's a lot of people who probably will have forgotten about it until Tuesday and Wednesday night when they watch their compilation on their local
yeah,
news channel. and, they'll be like, oh yeah, that happened.
yeah.
We impeached the president, man. That is like
We impeached him, and here's what's crazy. He was impeached for asking for help to beat the guy who he got his ass kicked by. That's what's kind of ironic in this whole thing. The year started off with Trump asking for dirt on Biden, and the year ended off with Biden having 7 more million votes than he did. It's kind of poetic justice, but Trump is, correct me if I'm wrong, the only president in history to get impeached and be one term.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, no,
because Nixon won.
I'm trying to think, was Nixon in a second term or first?
Nixon
was in the second term.
Nixon won re-election. Yeah.
Yeah.
During he won election while he was being kind of indicted in the process. He got indicted after the election.
Well, but what's funny was impeachment didn't even come up a lot during the campaign, and I would think, and maybe this is malfeasance on the Democrats' part, but that should have been brought up. It's amazing how impeachment happened and it just went away.
I do have a few, if you don't mind. I have 5 that are honorable mentions.
Okay, let's hear them.
This is the category of these would be bigger stories in a normal year.
Okay.
Number 1 is Parasite. Parasite was completely lost in the whole mix. It happened in February, right around when COVID was kicking up. Parasite would be a much, much bigger story. Second, Harvey Weinstein.
For you guys to know, Parasite the movie.
Yes, Parasite the movie. Harvey Weinstein, which would finally be taken down, would have been a much bigger story. Kim Jong-un dying somehow, then coming back 2 days later. And I know he's done that before, but people were saying he was dead, Another big story would have been Theo Epstein and his lady friend Maxwell. I think that would have been a much bigger story. And then lastly are the deaths of Chadwick, Boseman. I think that was kind of overshadowed because of everything going on. But and RBG, who I think because it was an election year and everybody was trying to fill her seat the day it happened, I think we would have kind of lived in her legacy a little longer if it wasn't an election year.
Well, I think the thing your honorable mentions were strong, and I think one of the things that happens there is, and I'm not sure if it happens in other circles, but obviously on Twitter and other social media, people oftentimes talk about 2020 from the standpoint of a screenwriter or a movie, and people are saying no one could write this. It literally was and continues to be, and we still have 5 more days or 4 more days, where just the absolute craziness is going to continue. And I think the thing that is so frustrating, it goes again, like I said, it goes back to the multitask. There's so many different things happening, because even when you look at all of the different elements, all of the different things we talked about, and then your 5 honorable mentions, there's multiple levels. The George Floyd thing, when you go back and you take it to what happened in Minneapolis, where all of the members of the city council said they're going to defund the police, and they didn't defund the police. when you look at what happened here in Chicago, where, Lori is, becoming a hero because of her response to COVID, and then being a little bit more controversial because how she dealt with the riots, to now you have the whole situation where the police, had the wrong, the wrongful search. There's just so many different elements.
Yeah.
The people who were protesting JB Pritzker, um, these were anti-Semitic protests.
Yeah.
You know, there's so, like you said, with your, especially with your, honorable five. And I think the thing that'll be fascinating is you and I think you've done a deeper dive than I have, but I've done a pretty deep dive. But you and I are going to be watching those year in reviews, and there's going to be 4 or 5 things we're going to both be like, oh, I forget. We're going to
Yeah. I
literally be
mean,
shocked.